My name is Rick Twaniak, and I'm the director of DevNet, which is our developer program that we're going to be touring you through for the next hour. For our agenda, we're going to start off with a panel discussion. And this panel discussion is going to go into general software strategy, what developers are facing, a little bit about Cisco. First of all, we have Dave Ward, who is our CTO and chief architect. Then we have Brad Casemore, who is director of research, Datacenter networks for IDC, to provide that sort of third-party analyst, impartial view. And then we have Jacoby Twaites, CEO of SPARKL, who's been one of our long-term customers, but more importantly, developers, because they do a lot of technology integration with us and development. So what we want to do right now is let me start off, and Brad, I'm going to start with you, put you on the spot early, okay? And I want to talk a little bit about where software is going, what transitions are happening in the market, and then start off talking a little bit about since this is a developer session,
sure,
what opportunities does that bring in for developers?
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Rick.
Thanks.
What we're finding, and it really starts with the workloads. So what's happening right now in the industry is we've gone from the client-server era to what at IDC we call the third platform, and that's virtualization, cloud, mobility, it's big data, it's social business. And those workloads are very different, and they are placing new demands on the network and obviously new demands on the IT team that operates the network and that manages it. And that's why you have the DevOps movement, right? Developers now, of course, it's all about the workload. That's why the networks exist. And the developers are gaining primacy in this context. It's not to say the network professionals are going away. They're not, and our studies show they aren't. But they, too, are having to learn new skills. The context has changed, and new demands are being placed, and also new possibilities. I mean, you can do a lot more. I think, actually, all this change makes the network even more important in this context.
What's interesting about this, in what you say, and we toss out DevOps and Agile as buzzwords in the industry, but as it's associated with workloads, data centers, in the network, it truly is development as a part of operations. And DevOps really shows up when you include application operations, server, storage, switching, routing, the whole full stack development. It is, and really that's the transition to development as a part of operation.
It's a great point, and actually that's why you're seeing a greater need, and our studies bear this out too, as people look at cloud, as they look at automating their network through obviously network automation tools and SDN, it leads to a change in the organization of the IT department. Things have to become more collaborative. There has to be better alignment. And it's, again, all about the workloads. I think it's very critical.
So we're talking about changes in the organization. We're talking about all this software transition. So Jacoby, you actually do something for a living here, right? You do real work. You're facing all this inside your company. This brings a lot of opportunities here, but what are some of the challenges that you face from a development standpoint?
There are two layers here. We've got the traditional world of the application developers, and these are people with a whole raft of tools and skills. And those include things such as writing code, obviously, testing, and so forth. Then you've got the infrastructure people, the networking engineers. But they also have a raft of skills, and they're also familiar with the necessity for scalability, reliability, manageability, the characteristics of infrastructure. So if you're going to deal with the two together, there's got to be some cross-learning. The application developers have to learn about the skills of the networking people. The networking people have to learn some of the skills of the application people. Now, does it go all the way in both directions? That's open to discussion. But I think that cross-fertilization is important.
I think Jacoby brought up a great point, which is a lot of times, we talk to CCIEs at Cisco Live, and they say, look, I'm a hardcore networking guy. Do I have to suddenly change my entire career and learn about everything there is to know about Java or some kind of functional language? But I think Jacoby said this correctly. Again, you have to have awareness to be able to communicate with the application developers and now understand that use case. That becomes that full stack notion. Everybody does not have to be an expert at every layer, but they do have to have enough awareness of what are the tools being used above me. How are the workloads using those levels of the platform and going forward? And I hope you're able to show that as people walk through DevNet, that in fact, we've also tried to take a platform stack approach to make sure that folks can be experts in their technology, but still find a way to broaden out and communicate. Because as you know, Jacoby, although you've changed your organization quite a bit, traditionally, the application guys don't talk to the server guys, don't talk to the networking folks, and it's been that lack of awareness between those layers that's been an issue.
And it's going to be key to really delivering value for those network professionals going forward. They have to be familiar with, like you said, Python, a lot of the automation tools, so they can understand how they can contribute value in this context. And they can actually step forward and say, by the way, did you know the network can do X? And it's very valuable in that context.
Some of this is about understanding. So a lot of application developers may have the impression that the network delivers perfect reliability at all times.
Well, it does, of course.
I haven't finished. Infinite bandwidth, and the other characteristics that actually are very hard to achieve. And learning about the difficulty of delivering those things is very important for application developers, because otherwise they're building their apps on a sandcastle, on sand, I mean. So they do have to learn the
It's a good point. It's a meet in the middle thing, right?
Definitely,
just as network engineers have to learn new skills and gain this contextual knowledge, developers also have to come halfway.
I think it's really important. There are skills in application development which are not exactly the way you would use them in infrastructure. So consider testing, for example. When you write code, you write tests to go with it, and that's at 3 levels. You might write unit tests, component tests, and system tests. Infrastructure is slightly different the way you go about testing. So it's not that there's a complete difference in the way these things are done, but you do have to cross-fertilize.
Okay. So Jacoby, I'm going to put you back on the spot here a little bit.
Sure.
All right. So we're talking about all these things that are needed and skills that are needed. You've had experience with developing on Cisco. How's it been? How are we doing?
What are we doing wrong?
Well, what a question. It's very hard ahead of the fact to guess what people are going to take up on. So I think what Cisco's done right is it's opened stuff up. Particularly, it's opened up the programmability of routers, which is really important. It's opened up programmability of policy tools. I'm thinking here of things like APIC-M, which is the policy-based infrastructure controller. I'm thinking of things like Identity Services Engine. Now, these are at different levels. If you consider a router, that's a very low-level entity to be programming against. And there's an API to do that, which is called 1PK. And it's very powerful indeed. But with power comes responsibility. So you write a program on top of that, and I can cause havoc in your infrastructure in no time at all. And application developers do like to cause havoc. So by opening these things up, I think what Cisco's done right is it's created a lot of, I'm not trying to say random, but it's created a lot of opportunity. And now the challenge is to see which bits of those are actually fertile ground, which are the ones you really want to focus on.
Okay.
So that's been really good.
All right. And have you had experience with DevNet at all? And
of course, yeah.
Okay. And how's the experience been?
Well, DevNet has come along, hasn't it?
It has.
When DevNet started, it was quite a small scale, not exactly a club, but there was a relatively small number of people who were, for example, contributing to the forums. Some of the questions were slightly wacky. We've now seen that the thing is developing considerably, so there's many more people on it now. There's a wider range of questions. You're starting to establish areas of expertise in the forums. One thing which I have found with DevNet is that the response I personally get from technical questions I put up has been quite remarkable. So quite often with public forums, you get inaccurate or very delayed answers to questions you might have. But I am finding that I'm getting good answers from people who I've come to know and trust.
Any last statements from the distinguished panel here, or Wim? Anything else?
What we'd like to show you on the tour is this notion of a full stack developer where certain skill sets can understand how they fit into these different platforms and the different levels of the stack that are emerging. So do try and keep this in your mind as you look at and talk with somebody who's very excited about their piece and realize, you know, a sandbox for developers that has a bunch of virtual equipment underneath it gives somebody a full view of things. Understand, you know, that each and every one of these very specific examples you'll see of how things can be improved through abstraction for a cloud IT professional or a workload system administrator, application operations folks, where they fit in that stack. And you'll begin to understand how our strategy is emerging you know, in allowing each and every operations group, as Brad mentioned when we began the talk, to hone their skill sets and understand what's going on around them.